Hey everybody, this is Perch. What kind of brand do you think Marvel and DC are? Are they a summer brand or a winter brand? Even though I'm talking about it a little bit. Well, this reader's asking a question. It says Christmas in July, which makes sense because by the time I actually read this email and then it goes out, it may be Christmas, so it'll be fit right in. Anyway, it says, "Hey Perch, sorry to ask you an early Christmas question. I mean, we'll see. But do you think that Marvel gives off more of a summer vibe than DC, who feels more like a winter brand? I've been leading late 70s, early 80s Captain America, and it just feels like he's the spirit of 1776. Where with DC, you have Batman who lives in the cold Gotham City. When your show ends, I'll miss it. Your channel feels like we're just a couple of friends or coworkers hanging out in the shop having a beer. And let me tell you, comic shop plus beer is a great plan. I mean, now that comics have gone fully niche in kind of what it does, I think that it would be, I mean, it would be a reasonable business idea to have a microbrewery type thing and then have comics. You're probably hitting the right demographic. If you aim your microbrewery at, people who are in their, late 30s, 40s, and then it's the pop culture aspect, as you pull in the 20s and the 30s, you can have beer locally brewed and everything else, and then you have comic books there. And I think that combo is probably pretty good. Now, the challenge with that, of course, would be you got to get your liquor license, and that's complex, and it requires a lot of business sense, and that's not where a lot of comic store owners hang their hat. Let's just put it that way. But I'm thinking even like you throw in tabletop gaming, and I mean, just picture yourself if you've seen like a good brewery, and you've got kind of wooden tables, and you got some, just kind of that aesthetic, and then you throw comics in there, and you throw beer in there. The good news is, I think you wind up selling more comics and overpriced comics because people get a little drunk and they forget that they're buying, this issue of Spider-Man for $10, and I think it works out. Plus, if they stop buying comics for a while, you're selling the beer, and that works too. So anyway, that's the plan, man. Brewery plus comics. That's the plan. Anyway, so winter or summer brand. Look, I get where you're coming from a little bit because, and part of it's kind of the choices they make to promote Gotham, and Gotham really is, I think, the center of this question because Gotham is a gothic, dark city. It's often shitty. It's like cold rain, and it's designed to be Chicago. But I've always thought that sounds good on paper, but it actually doesn't resemble Chicago at all, in my opinion. I don't know. By the way, speaking about comic book arguments, I've had fierce arguments over this. I know Gotham is supposed to be Chicago. DC has said this. Lots of people have said this. I don't see it at all. I've been to Chicago. If you've been to Chicago, that's not what Chicago looks like at all. It's not. I mean, you can make a far better case that Gotham is Barcelona or Prague or a place like that. I mean, that's really what Gotham is like, looks like, feels like, other than, it's not in the U.S. Metropolis, New York, no doubt about it. Metropolis is clearly New York. That has a New York vibe, feels like New York, and feels like summer if we're putting a season to it. But Gotham does perpetually feel like winter, and it's because of that dark aesthetic. Marvel, what's funny, as a legitimate answer to your question, Marvel does very little with winter in their comics. And they certainly have done some. It's not like there's zero. But if you go back to, and it was in an issue of Power Pack, because Power Pack did a couple of issues in the snow, and the writer at the time made a comment in the comic that Power Pack's one of the only comics that has winter in it. This is back in the 80s. But there's, Marvel just doesn't do a lot with winter. By and large. And I don't know, I mean, hell, if you're cheaping out on, artists, then, just a kind of a fluffy, generalized snow mask feels like, it would mask some of those art skills. So, I mean, don't knock it, Marvel. This could be a good plan. But anyway, I think, for me, so I guess I see what you're saying. I think DC does give off more of, at times, a kind of a dark gothic-y vibe. Again, unless you're Superman, so it really depends on the comic book you're doing. But DC has also done a little bit more with winter. I don't know. DC feels more balanced to me. Marvel definitely feels more like it's summer or, homogenous, sunny, clear day time in comic land. That's how it feels like to me. Um, Going away from the question for a little bit, I like the kind of comics that really nail different environments, different atmospheres. It is a heavier burden on the artist, and I've talked to some artists about this, and it's kind of like, you're an artist and you've never been to Seattle, and then you're told to draw Seattle, so you look up on Google and you're like, all right, there's a Space Needle there and some water. Okay, it's hard to know what to do with the city if you're not a part of it. And so, and also a lot of the detailed backgrounds and the atmosphere is complex. And on top of that, it doesn't feel like a good use of your time if you're an artist, because what you want to be doing is drawing the superheroes. That's the forefront of the story. That's really the centerpiece of it. And so this idea that we're going to invest a lot of effort into drawing kind of backgrounds that most people won't care about, it's tough. But when you do get a comic book that really invests in the background and really kind of nails that feeling, and I mean, this is kind of a weird example, but Watchmen nailed the New York aesthetic. I mean, it felt gritty. It felt like, in fact, all the environments in Watchmen felt pretty rich artistically. And if you look at other kind of creators that have done this, I mean, there's at different times, but basically, once you see it in a comic book, the generic, bland city, there's some buildings here and then maybe a couple cars. It just stops feeling. Once you notice this in a comic book, it's hard to not notice this, and you start realizing how just generic and bland most of the backgrounds and things are. It is a shame. And so, I don't know. I would love to see more comic artists, more comics lean more into the cities, lean more into the environments, actually have proper winter, do some really cool things with it. And if there's one aspect of AI that probably would, I'm not saying work, but that if there's an argument for AI, then I mean, I think you could argue that doing the backgrounds and things in AI would actually be probably pretty interesting. I think that's an area that you probably get better looking comics, but you can't do AI for just the backgrounds, pencils for the heroes. I think that would look weird. So I mean, it's a tricky part, and certainly not advocating for AI, but that's one area where most artists are just not going to put in the time and effort into the background because it's not the feature of the story. They're not going to put time and effort into the weather because it generally isn't either. And so they're keeping the action where it belongs. They're keeping the attention where it belongs, which is the superheroes, the action, that kind of environment. The only problem is it's labor intensive, and you need to know the area, and you need to know a little bit what's going on. You need to know how to play these things off. I mean, if you're going to do a really stormy, snowy day, it can be visually very, very exciting, but you got to have some kind of tricks up your sleeve of how you're going to communicate and convey that, because it's you can turn it to your advantage, but you have to kind of know how to draw snow, if you will, and know how to draw fights in snow. And if you're drawing comics every month, how often is a writer going to have you draw a fight in the snow? So are you going to perfect that skill? I mean, you know what I mean? There's a bunch of aspects to this that I think kind of defeat the whole idea before it really gets rolling. But anyway, decent question. What about you? Do you guys like when the environment really plays kind of a centerpiece of the story? I really do. It rarely happens, and I am sympathetic to why it rarely happens. Does that make any sense? Anyway, let me know in the comments below, how big does environment, whether it's weather, city, atmosphere, whatever it happens to be, are you a fall, spring, summer, or winter? What are you? What's your color? What's your aura? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.